Queen Siraxa stood on the balcony of her palace, her eyes gazing out into the endless black void of space. The stars twinkled softly in the distance, like countless tiny jewels scattered across the fabric of the night. But to the queen, they were cold and distant. Her mind was not on the stars or the beauty of the universe. It was on one thing, and one thing only: the loss of her daughter, Princess Vale. It had been 2 years since the ambush during the Galactic Rift War. Her daughter, the heir to the Zalari Dominion, had been leading an assault against a rebel faction on the outskirts of the galaxy when her ship was destroyed in a trap. The wreckage had been found, but there was no sign of Vael. It was believed that she had perished in the blast. Since then, the queen's heart had been heavy, weighed down by the grief of losing her only child. The once mighty Zalari Dominion was now on the edge of collapse. Siraxa had lost not only her daughter but also the will to fight. Her people, once united by a common cause, were beginning to splinter. Rebellions erupted on distant planets, and the once proud fleet of the Dominion was now a mere shadow of its former strength. The Queen had no hope left for victory. She was ready to surrender, to let the Dominion fall into the hands of whatever forces would take it. But then the reports began to come in. Whispers of a mysterious human warrior who had been appearing across the galaxy, bringing peace to broken worlds and bringing down tyrants. The rumors were strange. Some said he had defeated entire armies with nothing but his fists. Others claimed he had the ability to heal the wounded with a touch. Some even believed that he had fought alongside the gods themselves. Queen Siraxa was skeptical at first. Humans, in her eyes, were nothing more than primitive creatures from a backwater planet, unworthy of attention. Yet there was something about these stories that intrigued her. A part of her, buried deep within her heart, wondered if this warrior might be the key to saving her people. A sharp voice broke her thoughts. "Your Majesty," came the voice of her trusted advisor, Commander Hrenar. "There is someone here to see you." Siraxa turned to face him. "Who is it?" she asked, her tone cold and distant. "An emissary from the humans, Your Majesty. He claims to have important news regarding your daughter." Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could this human have information about Vale? She had not dared to hope that her daughter might still be alive, but now a spark of hope flickered within her. "Bring him to me." Moments later, a tall figure entered the throne room. He was dressed in simple, practical clothing, with a long coat that had clearly seen many battles. His face was scarred, but his eyes were sharp, full of purpose. He moved with the confidence of a man who had seen the worst the universe had to offer and had survived it all. The human bowed low before the Queen. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady and respectful. "I am Commander Elias Vorn, of the Earth Military. I bring news of your daughter, Princess Vael." Siraxa's breath caught in her throat. "Where is she?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of hope and fear. "Is she alive? Tell me, Commander. I must know." Elias nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty. She is alive, though not as you may expect. I found her on a derelict moon in a state of stasis. She had been held captive by enemies of your dominion, hidden away for reasons unknown." The Queen's heart raced. "My daughter is alive?" she whispered as if she couldn't quite believe it. "But why was she hidden? Why not return her to me?" Elias hesitated for a moment, his face darkening. "There are those within your empire who do not want your daughter to return. I believe someone in your court is responsible for her captivity." The Queen's anger flared and her eyes narrowed. "Treachery within my own court," she muttered, her voice laced with fury. "Who would dare to betray their queen and their princess?" Elias took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm. "I don't know yet, Your Majesty, but I believe this treason is part of a larger conspiracy, one that threatens not just your family, but the future of the Dominion itself." Siraxa stood silent for a moment, processing his words. The loss of her daughter had been painful enough, but the thought that there was a traitor within her ranks only added to the weight of her grief. Still, the thought that Vale was alive brought a glimmer of hope she had not felt in years. "Where is my daughter now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She is with my crew, Your Majesty," Elias said. "We've kept her hidden for safety. The warlord responsible for her imprisonment will not stop until he has her again. We need to act. Quickly." The queen looked at Elias, her eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. "I will not let my daughter be taken from me again," she vowed. "Tell me what must be done." Elias bowed again, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Together we will find the traitors, Your Majesty. Together we will bring peace to your people." Siraxa, though still grieving, felt a fire begin to burn within her. She would not let her daughter's sacrifice be in vain. And with this human warrior by her side, perhaps there was still a chance to restore the Dominion to its former glory. Commander Elias Vorn stood before the damaged ship, his eyes scanning the wreckage. The moons of this forgotten system, once bustling with life, now seemed silent and lifeless. The faint glow of distant stars cast long shadows across the shattered hull of the shipwreck he had just boarded. This was no ordinary mission. This was the key to the future of the Zalari Dominion and, perhaps, to peace across the galaxy. His team moved swiftly, pulling debris aside and checking the ship's systems. They weren't here to salvage. No, they were here to find something far more precious. Someone. Elias turned to his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed woman named Kayla. "Any sign of life?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. "Not yet, Commander," she replied, her face tense as she worked her scanner. "But I've detected a life pod in the lower section. It's intact, for now." Elias nodded. His mission was clear. Find the Zalari princess, Vielle, and bring her back to her mother, Queen Siraxa. He had heard the rumors. This mission, though dangerous, might be his last. Yet something about it tugged at his heart. He had never been one for politics or royal families. To him, they were just more players in a galaxy filled with conflict and violence. But the story of Vale had drawn him in, like a thread woven into the fabric of his own struggles. As they descended into the depths of the ship, the silence weighed heavily on them. The broken corridors and dim lights seemed like ghosts of the past. Every step they took, every corner they turned, led them deeper into this cold, abandoned world. Then Kayla's voice broke through the silence. "Commander, here." She stood at the entrance of a small chamber, its walls covered in ancient symbols of the Zalari. Elias's heart raced. This was it. Inside the chamber lay the stasis pod, its clear surface fogged by time. Elias walked up to it, his breath catching in his chest. There, lying inside, was the figure of Princess Vielle. She was young, her features soft, though marred by the signs of hardship, bruises on her arms, a thinness to her body that suggested months of captivity, but it was her eyes that struck him. Even in stasis, they were open, staring directly at him, filled with something he had not expected, a quiet determination. Elias stepped back, looking at his crew. "Prepare the pod for transport," he said, his voice steady but urgent. He had no idea what he was about to face, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about bringing a lost princess home. There were deeper layers to this, layers that would change everything. The journey back to their ship was tense. The small team of humans moved quickly, not daring to stop or waste time. They had to be careful. If the forces that had captured Vielle were still watching this place, they would know that someone had come for her. Elias's thoughts were filled with questions. Who had taken Vielle? Why had they hidden her for so long? He'd been part of many covert missions, but nothing had felt as personal as this one. The political implications were enormous. The fate of an entire empire rested on his success. As they made their way through the dark corridors of the ship, Elias couldn't help but notice the strange, almost ancient design of the Zalari vessel. Their ships were unlike anything the humans had ever seen, sleek, organic, their architecture flowing and curving as if alive. The walls seemed to breathe, and the lights flickered like fireflies. There was something almost alien about it, even for him, a veteran of many battles. When they finally reached the hangar and secured the stasis pod on the transport vessel, Elias paused to look at the ship's exterior. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The emptiness of space around them felt heavy, as if the stars themselves were waiting for something to happen. "We're ready, Commander," Kayla said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Elias nodded, his mind focused. "Let's get her back to Queen Siraxa." Hours later, they arrived at the Zalari capital, a beautiful planet covered in lush forests and towering cities. From the orbit, it looked serene, almost too perfect. Yet, beneath that surface, the Dominion was fractured. Elias could feel it. In the air, the tension that hung over the planet like a storm cloud. As the transport ship landed near the royal palace, a feeling of unease settled in Elias's chest. This was the moment that could change everything. He led his team through the grand halls of the palace, where the regal decor of the Eleri contrasted sharply with the weariness in his own eyes. As they approached the throne room, Elias couldn't help but notice the silence that greeted them. There was no cheer, no welcome, only the steady, rhythmic sound of the guards, footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. And then she appeared. Queen Siraxa, her regal form draped in the finest garments of her people, stood at the far end of the room. Her face was a mask of emotion, but Elias could see the strain beneath it, the pain of a mother who had lost her daughter, the weight of a ruler who had lost her kingdom. When she saw the stasis pod, her face softened, her eyes widening in disbelief. "My daughter." The queen's voice trembled, a crack in her otherwise calm demeanor. "She's alive?" Elias stepped forward, bowing his head in respect. "She is, Your Majesty, and I believe she can help you rebuild." Queen Siraxa looked at the pod, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the room fell silent. Then, with slow, measured steps, she approached the pod. Her hand hovered over the cold surface, her fingers trembling as she gently touched it. "She's home," the queen whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Elias stood back, giving her space. The journey had been long, but it was only just beginning. The war, the secrets, and the betrayals, none of it would be easy. But one thing was clear. The return of Vale was not just the return of a lost princess. It was the return of hope. The days that followed Princess Vael's return to the Zalari palace were filled with both hope and uncertainty. The royal chambers, once filled with the sounds of laughter and joy, were now quiet. Even the grand halls, adorned with the finest tapestries and glowing lights, felt heavy with the weight of lost time. Vael had been gone for so long, and now that she had returned, everything felt different. There was no joy in her eyes, no warmth in her smile. She was a stranger to the world she once ruled. Elias Vorn stood by the palace window, his gaze lost in the distance. The news of Vael's return had spread quickly throughout the planet, but despite the celebrations, he could sense the tension in the air. There were whispers, rumors. Some spoke of a return to power, while others feared what it would mean for the future of the Dominion. No one knew what to expect from the young princess who had been hidden away for so long. The sound of footsteps broke his thoughts. He turned to see Kayla walking toward him, her face serious. "Commander," she said, her voice low, "the Queen wants to speak with you." Elias nodded. "Thank you, Kayla. Lead the way." In the royal chamber, Queen Siraxa sat in her throne, her regal presence filling the room. Her eyes were focused on the stasis pod, now placed in the center, of the chamber. Princess Vielle lay inside, her face peaceful yet distant, as if lost in a dream. The queen's heart ached at the sight of her daughter, so close and yet so far away. She had been fighting for so long, trying to hold her empire together, but now, with Vielle's return, everything had changed. The weight of leadership, the burden of rule, now felt heavier than ever. Elias entered the room, his boots silent on the marble floor. He bowed low before the queen, his respect for her evident in his posture. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. "How is she?" "Queen," Saraxa sighed, her gaze not leaving the stasis pod. She's alive, but she's not the same. I don't know what happened to her during those years of captivity, but something inside her has changed. She doesn't speak. She barely moves. It's as if she's locked inside herself." Elias approached the pod, his eyes softening as he looked at the young princess. Despite the changes, he could see the strength in her. There was something powerful about her presence, something that went beyond her royal blood. He had always believed that a person's true power came from within, from their ability to adapt, to survive, and to rise above challenges. And Vielle, he could tell, had survived far more than anyone could imagine. "Perhaps we need to give her time," Elias said, his voice gentle. "You said she was hidden away by your enemies. She may still be recovering from whatever they did to her. It will take time for her to trust again." The queen nodded slowly, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I fear time is something we do not have. The Dominion is falling apart, and even now there are enemies moving against us. There are traitors in my court, and I have no idea who to trust. My daughter may be the only hope we have left, but if she cannot lead—" Elias stood tall, his gaze firm. "Then let me help her. We'll find a way to bring her back. Together." The queen's eyes met his, and for a moment she seemed to consider his words. "I want to believe you, Commander. I do. But my people, they won't follow someone who isn't of Solari blood. And Vielle, she hasn't spoken since she woke up. She doesn't remember much. She doesn't even remember the war." Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had never been a politician, never been someone to play the games of power. But this was different. This wasn't about ruling an empire or gaining control. This was about saving a people who had lost their way. It was about giving them hope. "Then we'll help her remember," he said quietly. "We'll help her find herself again. And I'll stand by her, just as I would for anyone who fights for what's right." The queen's gaze softened, and she stood from her throne. She walked slowly toward the stasis pod, her fingers brushing the surface of the transparent shell. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "Do you believe she can lead us, Commander? After everything?" Elias stood by her side, his eyes locked on Vielle's still form. He could feel the weight of the moment, the responsibility of the task ahead, but deep down he knew this was what had to be done. Vielle had the strength, the heart, and the will to lead. She just needed to remember who she was. "I do," he said, his voice unwavering, "and I will do everything in my power to help her." As the days passed, Elias and his team worked tirelessly to help Vielle recover. They began with small steps. Simple conversations, the retelling of her memories, the quiet encouragement to speak. But it was clear that Vielle was not the same person she once was. She would listen, but she would not speak. Her eyes remained distant, as though she were somewhere far away, trapped inside herself. Elias was not discouraged. He had seen people go through worse, warriors broken by the brutality of battle, civilians lost to the horrors of war. But in each of them, there was a spark, a light that never completely went out. And if there was one thing Elias knew, it was that no one could stay lost forever. One afternoon, as Elias sat beside Vielle in the royal garden, watching the alien. Flowers bloom in the soft sunlight. She finally spoke. "I remember. The war," she said, her voice a mere whisper, fragile but steady. "I remember the day the ship was destroyed. I remember the fear. But I don't know why I was taken." Elias smiled softly. "You don't have to remember everything at once. We'll uncover the truth together." Vial's eyes met his, and for the first time since her return, there was a flicker of recognition, a spark of hope. "I want to fight," she said, her voice gaining strength. "For my people. For my mother." Elias nodded, proud of her. "Then let's fight. Together." The royal palace was a place of quiet, but beneath the surface, the tension was palpable. Queen Syrax's court was divided, with whispers of betrayal echoing through the halls. The return of Princess Vael, once thought lost, had sparked hope in many, but not everyone was happy. Some feared the return of the princess, while others, more ambitious and power-hungry, saw it as a threat to their position. And then there were those who had silently worked behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elias Vorn could feel it. The air was thick with suspicion. He had spent years fighting on battlefields, but political intrigue and palace schemes were something else entirely. He knew how to fight with weapons, but this was a war of words, secrets, and deception, and the stakes were just as high. It had been a week since Vial had started speaking again, and while she had made progress in recalling her memories, something was still missing. She was still distant, her mind seemingly clouded with the trauma of what had happened during her captivity. The more Elias spoke with her, the more he realized that the truth of her imprisonment was hidden deep within her memories. Someone had erased parts of her past, and the answers she needed to reclaim her identity were buried somewhere in the darkness of her mind. Elias sat in the command room of the palace, staring at the map of the Dominion. The borders were unstable, and enemy forces were closing in on the capital. But there was something else: the reports of unusual movements within the royal court. Some of the nobles were gathering in secret, making deals with outside forces. Elias had a feeling that not all the threats to the Dominion came from beyond its borders. Some were much closer to home. "Commander, we've intercepted a transmission," Kayla said, entering the room with urgency. "It's from a high-ranking officer in the Zalari fleet. He's been in contact with the rebels." Elias's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Admiral Dethros," she replied, showing him the transmission. "He's been pushing for a more aggressive strategy, but there's something strange in his messages. He's speaking to the rebels as if they're allies." Elias's pulse quickened. Dethros was one of the highest-ranking officers in the Zalari fleet, a trusted military leader. If he was working with the rebels, then it meant that someone within the very heart of the Dominion was a traitor. "Dethros was a close advisor to the Queen," Elias muttered. "We need to find out who's behind this." "We've already started gathering intel," Kayla replied. "But we may need Vael's help. She knows the royal court better than anyone, and she might be able to identify allies or enemies hidden within the palace." Elias thought for a moment. He wasn't sure if Vael was ready to dive into the dangerous politics of her mother's court, but if there was anyone who could help expose the traitors, it was her. Later that evening, Elias and Kayla met with Vael in the palace garden. The air was cool, and the soft sound of the wind rustling through the trees provided a quiet backdrop to the conversation. Vael was sitting on a stone bench, her hands folded in her lap, lost in thought. "Vael," Elias began, his voice calm but firm, "we need your help. The Dominion is in danger. Someone within your mother's court is working with the rebels. We believe Admiral Dethros is one of them." Vial's eyes flickered with recognition at the mention of Dethros's name. She had once admired him, trusted him like a mentor. But now, the shadow of doubt hung over that memory. Admiral Dethros. Vielle whispered, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I remember him, but I don't know why I trusted him. Something doesn't feel right. Elias took a step closer, his expression serious. You were a leader before you were taken. You know the court, Vielle. You know the people your mother trusted. We need you to help us find the traitors before they destroy everything. Vielle stood up slowly, her eyes searching the stars above. I want to help. I want to fight, but... She paused, her voice faltering. I don't know if I can trust my own memories. So much has been taken from me. I can't even remember the faces of some of my closest allies. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll help you. You're not alone in this. We'll uncover the truth together. I promise you. Vielle nodded slowly, her determination beginning to return. She had been lost for so long, but now, surrounded by people who believed in her, she could feel herself growing stronger. The fight for her people was not just about reclaiming her throne. It was about reclaiming her identity, her purpose. Next morning, Vielle accompanied Elias and Kayla to the royal court. The palace was bustling with activity as nobles and officials hurried through the halls, preparing for the impending crisis. The tension was undeniable, and the closer they got to the council chambers, the more Vielle felt the weight of her responsibility. They entered the council chamber. Vielle's eyes scanned the room. There were many familiar faces, but some of them now felt distant, like shadows of the past. She had been away for too long. She didn't know who could be trusted anymore. Elias could see the uncertainty in her eyes. It's okay, he whispered. We're with you. Vielle nodded, steeling herself. She needed to find the truth, and fast. The Dominion could not afford to wait any longer. As they walked into the center of the room, all eyes turned to her. The nobles and advisors fell silent, some bowing, others standing still in shock. Vielle stood tall, her eyes sweeping over the faces of those who once served her. My mother is not well, Vielle said, her voice strong, though her heart raced. And I will take her place in leading the Dominion, but I will not do so alone. I need those who are loyal to the throne to step forward, and those who betray us will be found. A heavy silence fell over the room. There was no immediate response, but Vielle could feel the tension growing. She had made her declaration. Now it was up to her to prove herself, not just to the court, but to her people. Elias stood by her side, watching the faces of the nobles, closely. He knew that Vielle was just beginning her journey of reclaiming her power, but in that moment, he saw something in her he had never seen before, a warrior spirit, unyielding and fierce. And in that spirit, he knew they would find the traitors, expose the conspiracy, and save the Dominion. Together. The journey back to the heart of the Dominion was tense. Vielle, with the support of Elias and his crew, had made the difficult decision to return to Zalara Prime, the capital planet of the Zalari Empire. It had been years since she had seen it, and in all that time, the weight of her absence had been felt throughout the land. Her return, though necessary, was not welcomed by all. Many feared her power, while others believed that an outsider, especially a human, had no place in the heart of their sacred world. Elias stood beside her on the bridge of the transport ship as they approached Zalara Prime's atmosphere. He watched the planet below, its emerald seas and golden cities shining brightly in the sun's warm light. Despite its beauty, the capital had changed since the days of her youth. The bustling markets, the shimmering temples, and the grand towers all seemed to have aged, like an empire that had lost its spark. Do you remember your home, Vielle? Elias asked, his voice quiet but full of curiosity. Vielle stood still at the viewport, her expression unreadable. I remember the sound of laughter in the halls. I remember my mother's voice when she would read to me about the ancient histories of our people. But now, it feels like a stranger's dream. Elias could feel the sorrow in her words, the loss of the world she once knew. But there was something in her tone, too, something determined. She wasn't just returning to her throne for the title. She was returning to restore something much more important, the soul of her people. As the transport ship descended into the heart of Zalara Prime's capital city, Val felt a wave of mixed emotions wash over her. The streets were crowded with Zalari citizens, but there were no cheers, no celebrations. Instead, the air was thick with suspicion. She could feel the tension, like the city itself was holding its breath. The ship landed in the royal landing bay, and the doors slid open. As Vale stepped out, she was greeted by a silent procession of guards. None of them cheered. None of them looked at her with the admiration she had once received. Instead, they were watchful, their eyes filled with uncertainty. It wasn't just the city that had changed. It was her people. Elias walked beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of emotions she was feeling. "Don't worry," he said softly. "They'll come around. You're their princess. You're their hope." Vael gave him a small nod, but the weight of the moment was heavy on her. She was walking into a palace filled with shadows. Treachery had taken root within her own court, and she knew it would take more than just reclaiming her throne to remove it. Her mind turned to Admiral Dethros, the trusted military leader who had now shown signs of betrayal. How deep did the conspiracy run? How many of her own people had turned against her? In the throne room, the queen sat upon her seat, a cold and weary figure. She looked at her daughter, a mixture of pride and sorrow in her eyes. The years had not been kind to Saraxa. The burden of ruling an empire on the brink of collapse had left its mark on her, and yet her gaze softened as Vael approached, standing tall with Elias at her side. "Mother," Vael said softly, her voice trembling slightly as she knelt before the throne. "I've come to help you rebuild." Queen Saraxa studied her daughter, carefully, as though trying to measure the woman she had become. For so long she had hoped that Vael would one day return, but now that she was here, Saraxa found herself unsure of what to feel. Vael was no longer the child she had once been. The time away from home had changed her. But what else had changed? Could Vael truly reclaim the Dominion? Could she be the leader they needed? "I am proud of you, my daughter," Saraxa said, her voice laced with emotion. "But there is much to be done. The Dominion has fallen into chaos. There are traitors in our ranks, and our people are divided. I cannot fix this alone, and I fear it may be too late for me to do anything about it." Vael looked up at her mother, determination filling her heart. "It's not too late. We can still save the Dominion, but we have to act quickly. I need your help. Together, we will find the traitors and bring unity back to our people." Saraxa looked at her daughter for a long moment, her eyes searching Vael's face as though trying to find the girl she had once known. "I will help you, Vael," the queen said finally. "But be warned. There are forces within our own court who will not accept you as their leader. We must be careful. There are those who would see both of us fall." As night fell over the palace, Vael and Elias sat together in a quiet corner of the royal gardens. The soft glow of the palace lights cast shadows over their faces as they talked about the challenges ahead. The air was cool, and the sounds of distant conversations echoed through the palace halls. "We need to move fast," Vael said, her voice low. "There's a conspiracy within the royal court. The traitors are trying to undermine everything I stand for. I can't trust anyone, not even my own advisors. We need to find out who's behind all of this." Elias nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's going to be dangerous, but I'll be by your side. We can't let them tear this empire apart." Vael smiled faintly, grateful for his loyalty. "I know. I trust you, Elias. You've been my anchor through all of this. We'll expose the traitors, and we'll bring peace to the Dominion." Elias reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone in this. You're stronger than you think, Vile, and together we'll find a way to restore the Dominion. You were born to lead. Don't forget that." The next morning, Vile stood before the royal council, her eyes scanning the faces of the nobles. The room was filled with whispers, but she remained calm, her gaze unwavering. This was her moment to reclaim her destiny. "I have returned to lead this empire," Vile declared, her voice steady and powerful. "And I will not rest until the Dominion is united again. Those who seek to destroy us will be exposed, and, together, we will rise again." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time since her return, Vile could feel a spark of hope flickering in the eyes of her people. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer alone. With Elias at her side and the strength of her people behind her, Vile knew she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle for the Dominion had just begun, and Vile was ready to lead it. Zalara Prime, once the shining jewel of the Zalari Dominion, now stood on the edge of collapse. As Vile sat on the throne, the weight of leadership felt heavier than ever. The Dominion was fractured, its people divided, its military scattered, and the court filled with traitors. But through it all, there was one constant: her resolve to unite her people and restore what had been lost. Despite her growing strength, Vile knew she could not do this alone. She needed allies. Strong, trustworthy allies who could help her rebuild the empire and protect it from those who sought to destroy it. But the question was, who could she trust? Elias stood at her side as they gathered around a large table in the war room. Maps of the Dominion were spread out before them, showing the scattered territories and the pockets of rebellion that had erupted in recent years. The rebel forces, led by former allies of the Dominion, were growing stronger. Vile could feel the pressure mounting with every passing day. "We have to act fast," Elias said, his voice low but urgent. "The longer we wait, the more power the rebels gain. We need to strike before they reach the heart of Zalara Prime." Vile nodded, her eyes scanning the map. "I agree, but we can't just fight them with force. We need more than that. We need a strategy, something unexpected. The element of surprise will be our greatest weapon." Kayla, the sharp-eyed second-in-command of Elias's crew, stepped forward. "There's a group of former military officers who might be willing to join our cause. They were once loyal to the Dominion, but they've become disillusioned after years of seeing the Empire crumble. If we can convince them to ally with us, we could turn the tide in our favor." Vile looked at Elias, then Kayla. "You think they would help us? After everything that's happened?" Elias stepped forward, his gaze steady. "It's worth a shot. If they're still loyal to the ideals of the Dominion, they might just see the value in helping restore it." Vile's heart sank at the thought of trusting former military officers, men and women who had once fought under her father's command. But she knew Elias was right. The Dominion couldn't afford to be picky anymore. They needed every possible ally, even if that meant joining forces with those who had once been part of the problem. "We'll need to meet with them then," Vile said, her voice firm. "But we have to move quickly. We cannot afford to waste time." The next day, a convoy of ships was prepared to transport Vile, Elias, and their most trusted allies to the meeting location. It was an abandoned outpost, deep in the mountains of a distant planet, far from the prying eyes of those who might try to stop them. As the convoy traveled through the cold void of space, Vale sat in silence, her mind racing. She had never imagined that she would have to rely on these former soldiers, many of whom had once been her family. She had once looked up to them, admired their courage and strength. Now they were strangers, and she wasn't sure if they could be trusted. Elias sat beside her, sensing her unease. "I know this isn't easy, Vale," he said quietly, "but this is the only way forward. You're doing the right thing." Vile glanced at him, grateful for his support. She had come to rely on Elias more than she had expected. He wasn't just a warrior, He was someone who understood the complexities of leadership, the burden that came with making impossible decisions. He had shown her that even in the darkest moments, there was hope. "I'm doing what I have to," Vial said, her voice soft but determined. "I can't afford to let my emotions get in the way. Not now, not when everything is on the line." Elias nodded. "I know, but just remember, sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean you have to do it alone." The outpost was located on a harsh, barren planet, a place that had once been a thriving military base but was now abandoned and forgotten. As the convoy landed, Val's pulse quickened. The air was thick with tension, and she could feel the weight of the meeting ahead. They were met by a small group of military officers, some of whom Val recognized immediately. There was Admiral Joran, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern face and a deep scar running down his cheek. Beside him was General Zoria, a sharp-eyed woman who had once been one of the fiercest commanders in the Dominion's fleet. Despite the years that had passed, they hadn't changed much, though their eyes carried a certain weariness, as though they had seen too much to ever be the same. As Vael and her group approached, Admiral Joran stepped forward, his gaze measuring her, carefully. "So, the lost princess has returned," he said, his voice gruff. "I never thought I'd see the day. What makes you think you can lead this empire now, Vial?" Vial met his gaze, her voice steady. "Because this empire belongs to my people, Admiral, and I will do whatever it takes to protect them. I'm not here for power. I'm here to restore what's been lost." General Zoria studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke. "We've been fighting for years, Vial, not just against the rebels, but against the corruption. Within our own ranks, the Dominion has fallen, and it's not just the enemies outside that threaten us. There are those within your court who want to see you fail." Vial's heart clenched. She had known this, of course. The whispers of betrayal had reached her, years long ago, but hearing it from those who had once been part of her father's inner circle made it all the more real. "We need you," Elias said, stepping forward. "You've all seen what the rebels are capable of. If we don't unite, we will all fall. The enemy is stronger than ever, and if we're going to win, we need to stand together." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of wind howling across the barren land. Finally, Admiral Joran spoke. "You have my sword, Vael," he said, his voice rough but sincere. "We may not trust each other fully, but we all want the same thing, to save the Dominion. If you're serious about this, then we'll stand with you." General Zoria nodded in agreement. "We'll fight for the future, not for the past. Together, we can make it happen." Vael's heart soared with relief. This alliance, though unlikely and fragile, was the key to their survival. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be more battles, more betrayals, and more sacrifices. But for the first time in years, she felt the faintest flicker of hope. "We fight together," Vial said, her voice strong. "And we win." Tuvel looked at him, her heart filled with gratitude. Elias had become more than just a soldier to her. He was a friend, a comrade, and in many ways the reason she had found the strength to keep going. He had been her guide in a world of uncertainty, a light in the darkest times. She knew she could trust him, and there, with a final determined movement, Vial raised her hand, signaling her soldiers to secure Dethros. The rebellion was over. The war was won. The Dominion had been saved. Vial stood atop the steps of the royal palace, her eyes gazing out over the city. The people of Zalara Prime were gathered below, cheering for their queen, for their future. Beside her, Elias stood, his presence a steady anchor. They had won, but this was just the beginning. Together, they would rebuild the Dominion, stronger than before. Vial turned to Elias, her heart full. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Elias smiled, his eyes soft with pride. "We did this together, Vile. You led them. You saved your people." The people of Zalara Prime looked to their queen, their princess, their leader. Vile had not only returned to reclaim her throne, she had returned to restore her people's hope, and in doing so she had become the leader they needed.